and they'd rather, make me the enemy.
What if I told you that everything you thought you knew about N.W.A. was a lie? The chaos in Detroit, the split that nearly tore hip-hop apart, the diss track that exploded like a bomb. All of it hides one shocking truth. And now, word on the street is that Ice Cube, the rap legend himself, is finally ready to expose what really went down inside the world's most dangerous group.
It just was one or two things that just didn't smell right.
And just when you think this story couldn't get any crazier, trust me, it does. Detroit, summer 1989. The air inside Joe Louis Arena was thick with anticipation. 20,000 fans, mostly young and restless, packed into the venue shoulder to shoulder. And through the chants and noise, one phrase began to rise louder than the rest. A phrase that terrified the police lined up outside. F the police! For N.W.A., this wasn't just another show. The song had already made them public enemy #1 in law enforcement circles nationwide. The FBI had even sent a warning letter to their label earlier that year, condemning the track as dangerous and inflammatory. Local police departments across the country threatened to shut down concerts if the group dared to perform it. But on this night in Detroit, against management's explicit orders, N.W.A. made their choice. Ice Cube caught Dr. Dre's eye. Yella's hand hovered over the turntables. Then, with a nod, Dre dropped the beat. Within seconds, the arena erupted. The crowd screamed every lyric back at them, fists in the air. But what happened next became one of the most infamous clashes between music and authority. The 2015 film Straight Outta Compton dramatized it as police storming the stage, dragging the rappers off in cuffs as rang out. But Ice Cube later set the record straight. That wasn't the full truth. There weren't. Instead, police lit fireworks inside the building, deliberately creating panic. It wasn't about safety, it was about control. The scene descended into chaos. Fans scattered as explosions echoed through the arena. Security clashed with officers, trying to protect the group, while the rappers themselves split up to escape. Each member has a different memory of that night. Cube claimed he hid his jacket and blended into the crowd to avoid being grabbed. DJ Yella recalled sprinting alone through the parking lot, unsure if he'd make it out. MC Ren said he doubled back into the building and slipped away unnoticed. In the end, none of them were arrested, only issued citations. It was less about shutting them down than sending a message. The police owned Detroit, not Northwest A. The irony? Backstage, management had already prepared for this outcome. Without the group's full knowledge, a deal had been signed with the promoters. Every time Northwest performed F the Police, the group would be fined 25-0. The Detroit incident wasn't just about rebellion, it revealed the layers of exploitation buried in the industry. The label and promoters were profiting from controversy, while the group carried the risk, the danger, and the heat. For the fans, that night was unforgettable. They didn't just witness a concert, they witnessed resistance in real time. And for N.W.A., the Detroit chaos became a defining moment in their legacy, proof that their music wasn't entertainment to those in power. It was a threat. Ice Cube would later joke that all the cops really wanted were autographs for their kids. But the truth was darker. Detroit 1989 showed just how far the establishment would go to silence voices that spoke too loudly against them. And the kicker? That night was just the beginning of the war between hip-hop and authority, a battle that would only grow louder in the years to come. Before the world called them legends, N.W.A. was treated like nobodies. In the late 1980s, they weren't seen as pioneers of a new sound, they were dismissed as troublemakers, outsiders that didn't belong in the polished halls of the music industry. Nothing proved that more than the night of their own listening party in Los Angeles for Straight Outta Compton, the very album that would later rewrite the rules of hip-hop. That evening should have been their victory lap, a moment to celebrate breaking barriers and pouring raw truth into music. Instead, it turned into one of the most humiliating nights of their careers. Security at the venue didn't even recognize them as the artists behind the record. To them, Cube, Dre, Easy, Yella, and Ren were just gangbangers. As Ice Cube recalled later in interviews, "We couldn't get in. Security was like, 'Y'all gangbangers ain't coming up in here.'" Imagine that. Creating one of the most influential rap albums of all time, only to be barred from entering your own party. For a moment, it was as if the entire system was laughing in their faces. The group ended up leaving the venue altogether, and instead of toasting champagne with executives, they sat in an IHOP, eating pancakes and venting about how the industry refused to take them seriously. The very album that would go on to terrify politicians, earn FBI letters, and inspire generations was being celebrated without the men who made it. That sting wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a symbol of how the music industry saw them. Too raw, too dangerous, too black, too real. This was how gatekeepers operated. Labels and promoters wanted the profit of their music without acknowledging the humanity of the artist behind it. They wanted the records to sell, but they didn't want the faces that came with them in the room. It was exploitation dressed up as business, humiliation disguised as formality. But for Ice Cube, humiliation had always carried a hidden lesson. He understood even then that what they had was bigger than record labels, bigger than managers, bigger than industry insiders trying to keep them outside the door. The streets had already chosen N.W.A. The energy at their shows, the way fans risked trouble with the police just to scream the police at the top of their lungs that meant more than any industry cosign. Cube knew they were building something that executives couldn't ignore forever. Still, the betrayals cut deep. Behind closed doors, deals were being made without their knowledge. Management signed contracts that put money in executives' pockets while the group bore the weight of fines, lawsuits, and bans. Performances of F the Police came with 25-0 penalties buried in paperwork. To the industry, N.W.A. wasn't a revolutionary force, they were a product to be contained and cashed in on. Looking back, the image of N.W., a denied entry to their own party, sitting in a pancake house instead almost feels poetic. The industry wanted to humiliate them. But that night became proof of just how out of touch the gatekeepers were. Within months, Straight Outta Compton would explode, pulling hip-hop from the streets of Compton into living rooms across America. The album the industry tried to celebrate without them became the one they could never escape. For N.W.A., the humiliation wasn't the end, it was fuel. That IHOP meal was more than just pancakes. It was a turning point, because once they left that table, they weren't just rappers fighting for recognition. They were revolutionaries, ready to flip humiliation into history. Behind the fame, Ice Cube was the engine of N.W.A., the group's voice, its sharpest pen, and its unflinching storyteller. He wrote nearly 90% of Straight Outta Compton and entire sections of Eazy-E's solo debut, Easy Does It. Cube's verses didn't just rhyme, they shaped the identity of gangsta rap. Yet when it came to money, the very lifeblood of the business, he was treated like a disposable ghostwriter. By late 1989, N.W.A. was the hottest rap group in America. Their album had gone gold, their shows sold out, and their name was being shouted in headlines across the country. But Cube's pockets didn't reflect the success. Manager Jerry Heller slid a contract across the table, 75-0. For most 18-year-olds, that kind of money would have been life-changing. But Cube was cautious. He had already seen how artists got trapped in bad deals. His publicist, Pat Charbonnet, gave him one piece of advice that would alter his career forever. Don't sign anything until a lawyer checks it. Quote, when Cube asked to have the paperwork reviewed, Heller refused. That was Cube's first red flag. Later, Cube explained the insult in his own words. They told me, we got 75-0 for you. I said, isn't that my money anyway? The record's out. Eazy told Jerry, don't give him anything unless he signs. So I just got up and left. That moment, December 1989, was the first crack in the armor of N.W.A. To the outside world, the group looked untouchable, fearless against the police, unbothered by politicians, unstoppable in the face of controversy. But on the inside, they weren't being torn apart by the FBI or the media. They were being ripped apart by contracts, money, and betrayal. And perhaps the deepest wound came not from Jerry Heller, but from Eazy-E. To Cube, Eazy wasn't just another group member, he was a brother in arms, someone he'd stood beside as they transformed Compton's raw reality into music that echoed worldwide. But Eazy sided with management, with Heller, with the machine that wanted Cube boxed in. For Cube, it wasn't just business, it was personal. He had carried the group on his pen, only to realize that loyalty meant nothing once money was on the table. What made the betrayal sting even more was how common it was in the industry. Hip-hop, still young and raw, was already filled with stories of artists cheated by labels, robbed by managers, and silenced by contract. Cube wasn't just fighting for himself, he was exposing a cycle that would repeat itself again and again for rappers across generations. The split was inevitable. Cube walked away before signing, leaving N.W.A. at the peak of their fame. To fans, it looked shocking. To insiders, it was survival. Cube refused to be another casualty of the industry's exploitation. The gamble was huge, walking away from the most notorious rap group on the planet, unsure if the world would accept him solo. But Cube wasn't done. Far from it. He was about to fire back in a way nobody in hip-hop had ever seen before, through lyrics sharper than bullets, verses designed to cut ties and expose the betrayal for everyone to hear. N.W.A. had humiliated him, cornered him, and underestimated him. Now Cube was ready to show them and the world that his pen was deadlier than their contract. When Ice Cube walked away from N.W.A. at the end of 1989, the split didn't just leave a hole in the group, it sparked one of the most legendary lyrical wars in hip-hop history. And N.W.A. wasted no time clowning him. On tracks like 100 Miles and Runnin' and Real Niggas, they mocked Cube's departure, painting him as selfish, disloyal, and even weak for leaving the crew. To fans, the shots felt personal, and almost overnight, people began choosing sides. Was Cube a traitor, or was he the only one brave enough to stand up to Jerry Heller's contracts? At first, Cube bit his tongue. He had bigger plans. In May 1990, he dropped his debut solo album, N.W.A.'s Most Wanted, recorded not in Los Angeles, but in New York with Public Enemy's legendary production team, the Bomb Squad. It was a risky move, the West Coast kingpin working with East Coast producers during a time when regional pride ran deep. But the gamble paid off. The album went platinum in just a few months, proving that Cube didn't need N.W.A. to dominate the charts. He could stand alone and thrive. But the disses from his former crew didn't stop. Every time N.W.A. put out a record, there was a jab at Cube buried in the verses. To the public, it looked like Cube was ignoring them. But behind the scenes, the anger was building. By 1991, he snapped. And what came next would forever change the way rap beefs were measured. That year, Cube stepped into the studio and recorded No Vaseline. From the opening bars, it was clear this wasn't a typical diss track. This was a full-scale demolition. Cube went down the line, torching every member of N.W.A., Ren, Yella, and especially Eazy-E. But he saved his sharpest venom for Jerry Heller, the manager he believed had poisoned the group's brotherhood. His words cut like blades. Get rid of that devil real simple. Put a bullet in his temple. Cause you can't be the S4 Life crew with a white Jew telling you what to do. The backlash was immediate. Some critics accused Cube of crossing a line into anti-Semitism, and radio stations debated whether to even play the track. But for the streets, for the fans who had been watching the drama unfold, it was something else entirely. It was truth-telling, raw and unfiltered. Cube didn't just diss N.W.A., he exposed them. He made it clear that the group had become puppets, controlled by Heller, trapped by contracts, and unable to speak freely. The impact was nuclear. Even decades later, publications like Rolling Stone and Complex continue to rank No Vaseline as one of the most savage diss tracks of all time. One fan summed it up perfectly: that wasn't just a track, that was a nuclear bomb. In a culture built on bravado, Cube had done what no one else dared. He dismantled his entire former crew in less than 5 minutes of fury. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse for N.W.A., they did. Leaving N.W.A. was a gamble, but it turned Ice Cube into something even bigger, hip-hop's most feared solo act. Many thought walking away from the world's most notorious rap group would end his career. Instead, it gave him the freedom to become the loudest voice of rebellion in America. In 1990, he dropped N.W.A.'s Most Wanted. It wasn't just an album, it was a statement. Recorded in New York with Public Enemy's Bomb Squad, the record blended Cube's West Coast fire with the Bomb Squad's chaotic, layered production. Songs like The Nigga You Love to Hate proved Cube wasn't just angry, he was unstoppable. He took on racism, poverty, and police brutality with a venom that cut deeper than anyone else in the game. The album went platinum, silencing anyone who thought he couldn't make it without N.W.A. But Cube wasn't done. In 1991, he came back harder with Death Certificate. The project was split in two: the Death side, a grim picture of the problems destroying Black America, and the Life side, Cube's vision for healing and change. But this wasn't a safe, polished message. It was a political grenade. Tracks like Black Korea, released months before the LA uprisings, fueled heated debates on race relations. And No Vaseline? That track didn't just burn bridges, it nuked them. Cube aimed at every member of N.W.A. and at Jerry Heller with one of the most vicious diss tracks of all time. The backlash was fierce. The album was banned in some US stores and even blocked in parts of the UK. Critics condemned it. Politicians attacked it, but fans couldn't look away. Despite the bans, Death Certificate still shot to number 2 on the Billboard charts. The message was clear. Controversy didn't kill Cube, it made him stronger. By 1992, America was on fire. The Rodney King verdict had sparked riots across Los Angeles. Into that chaos, Cube released The Predator. It was his sharpest political work yet, an album dripping with rage at a system built on injustice. On We Had to Tear This Up, Cube openly declared war on corrupt cops and the broken court system. But the same album carried It Was a Good Day, a rare, almost serene track that painted a picture of peace in South Central. That duality showed Cube's genius. He could channel pure fury one moment, then capture quiet hope the next. By now, critics had branded him the most dangerous rapper alive. And they weren't wrong. Cube wasn't just rapping. He was narrating America's nightmare poverty, racism, corruption, violence, all the things politicians wanted hidden. His music was a mirror, reflecting a reality too raw for TV or radio, but impossible to deny. And just when people thought Cube would fade as a one-note controversial rapper, he reinvented himself again. In 1991, Ice Cube stepped onto the big screen in John Singleton's groundbreaking film Boys in the Hood. His role as Doughboy, the troubled yet deeply human street figure, was iconic. It wasn't just Cube acting, it was Cube living the very stories he had been rapping about. The performance was so raw, so authentic, that audiences and critics alike realized something important. Cube wasn't just a rapper, he was a storyteller. Hollywood took notice. What could have been a one-time casting turned into the start of a second career. Cube followed with films like Trespass and Higher Learning, each time proving he could hold his own alongside established actors. By the mid-90s, he was no longer just a voice from Compton, he was a cultural figure shaping both music and cinema. But Cube didn't stop at acting. He wrote and starred in Friday 1995, a film that flipped the hood movie genre on its head. Where Boys in the Hood was tragedy, Friday was comedy, a day-in-the-life classic that became a cult phenomenon and launched a franchise. That duality showed Cube's versatility. He could channel rage and heartbreak, or laughter and light, without losing authenticity. Outside of film, Cube built a business empire. He launched his own production company, created soundtracks, and eventually moved into producing hits like Barbershop and family-friendly blockbusters like Are We There Yet? Few rappers had managed such a crossover without losing credibility, but Cube balanced both worlds. And yet, no matter how far he went, he never forgot N.W.A. In interviews, films, and music, he kept reminding the world why he walked away and how that choice set the stage for everything he became. By the time N.W.A. was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2016, their legacy was cemented. Generations had grown up on their music, and their story had been retold in films, documentaries, and classrooms. But on that stage, one presence was missing: Eazy-E, who had passed away in 1995 from AIDS-related complications. His absence was a reminder that history had come full circle. The group had reunited years earlier, burying some of the bitterness that once tore them apart. Still, Cube's truth never changed. Reflecting on his decision to walk away, Cube told Hip Hop DX, "Leaving N.W.A. taught me to trust myself. Pay people what you owe them, and you stay together. Get greedy, and you break up." That line wasn't just about music, it was about life. For Cube, the story of N.W.A. wasn't only about rebellion against authority, but also rebellion against exploitation from within. What makes the legacy even more powerful is how relevant it remains today. In the era of Black Lives Matter, F.K. the Police found new life. Protesters chanted it in the streets. Clips of the song spread across TikTok and Twitter, young fans discovering the track as though it had been written yesterday. For a new generation, N.W.A.'s voice became the soundtrack of resistance, again proof that their words never lost their edge. But alongside that anthem came Cube's personal story, the betrayal, the control, the contracts, and the escape that reshaped him into one of hip-hop's most unflinching solo forces. Young fans saw not just the rebellion, but the cost of it. They saw how Cube's decision to stand alone became the blueprint for rappers demanding independence today. So here's the real legacy. N.W.A. shocked the world, ripping the veil off of American hypocrisy. But Ice Cube? He exposed the truth that kept them from lasting. In doing so, he became more than a rapper. He became a survivor and the keeper of the lesson that success without fairness will always collapse from the inside. Then from lasting, Ice Cube didn't just leave N.W.A. He exposed what really happened inside: the exploitation, the betrayals, and the moment the world's most dangerous group tore itself apart. And now the question falls to you: did Cube save himself by walking away? Or did his exit destroy the group from the inside? Drop your thoughts below. Because if this is what we know about N.W.A., just imagine what stories are still being hidden behind closed doors.